Imagine waking up and the first thing you taste is smoke. Not coffee, not toothpaste, smoke. It hangs in the air, clings to your hair, seeps into your clothes. Your bed is not a mattress, but a pile of straw. The floor beneath you is packed dirt. Outside, the wind presses against a roof made of thatch, and somewhere in the dim light, a cow shifts its weight only a few steps away. Welcome to England in the year 950. Welcome inside a Saxon house. Before we step fully through that low wooden doorway, let me invite you to settle in with me. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into the past, take a second to support the channel in whatever way feels right to you. A like, a subscription, or even a quick comment telling me where you're listening from helps this little historical fireside keep glowing. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now maybe dim the lights a touch and let us walk inside. The house is smaller than you expected. Archaeologists at sites like Weststow in Suffolk have reconstructed homes from this exact period. What they found surprises many people. No stone walls, no towering castle in sight. Most Saxons lived in timber houses built with a technique called wattle and daub. Thin wooden rods were woven together like a basket, then covered in a mix of mud, straw and animal dung. Practical, insulating, and yes, probably a little smelly on a rainy day. The roof was thick with straw thatch. It kept the rain out mostly, but there was no chimney. The fire burned in the centre of the room and the smoke drifted upward, slowly escaping through gaps in the roof. Your eyes would water. Your lungs would adjust. Historians believe that over time the smoke actually helped preserve the thatch by keeping insects away. So if you ever complain about a smoky barbecue, just remember, this was daily life. The floor was hard earth, sometimes covered with rushes or straw that would be replaced when too dirty. Furniture was simple, a few wooden chests, a rough table, maybe benches. Beds were straw pallets shared by family members. Privacy was almost non-existent. And here is something important. When we think of early medieval England, we often picture grand stone castles. But in the year 950, those Norman stone fortresses did not yet exist. The famous castles we see today would arrive after the Norman conquest in the year 1066. For now, most people lived in structures like this, humble, vulnerable, entirely dependent on wood, mud and skill. In colder months, animals might be brought inside or into an attached area to share warmth. It sounds uncomfortable to us. To them it meant survival. Heat was life. Pause for a second and picture it. No glass windows, no insulation, no thermostat. Just fire, family and whatever you could build with your own hands. This house was not designed for comfort. It was designed to endure. And as we stay here a little longer, we'll see that the real hardship was not only in the walls or the smoke, but in the rhythm of daily work that began before the sun even rose. Now that we're standing inside this smoky wooden house, let us follow its people through a single day. The sky is still dark when movement begins. There is no such thing as sleeping in. In the year 950, your schedule is set by the sun and the seasons. In rural Anglo-Saxon England, historians estimate that as much as 80 to 90% of the population worked in agriculture. If the crops fail, everything fails. You step outside. The air is cold. The ground is damp. The fields stretch out in narrow strips, part of what historians call the open field system. Families did not usually farm one large private plot. Instead, they worked scattered strips of land across shared fields. Cooperation was not optional, it was survival. The plough waiting for you is heavy, and made mostly of wood tipped with iron if you're fortunate. It is pulled by oxen, not horses. Oxen are slower but stronger and cheaper to maintain. You guide it through stubborn soil that does not care about your back or your blisters. By mid-morning, your stomach reminds you that breakfast was small. Most ordinary Saxons ate a simple diet: barley bread, oat porridge, beans, cabbage. Archaeological studies of human remains from Anglo-Saxon cemeteries show signs of repetitive strain in the joints, and in some cases evidence of nutritional stress. Meat was rare for common people, usually saved for feast days or special occasions. Let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you worried about where your next meal would come from? For most of us, hunger is an inconvenience. For them, it was a constant shadow, and work did not stop at the fields. Back at the house, someone is grinding grain using a hand quern. It is slow, rhythmic, and exhausting. Someone else is spinning wool into thread. Cloth production was essential and time-consuming. A single garment represented hours upon hours of labour. Nothing was wasted. A torn tunic would be patched until it could not be patched anymore. Children were not shielded from this rhythm. By the age of 7 or 8, many were already contributing in meaningful ways, watching animals, carrying water, learning the skills that would define their survival. Childhood as we imagine it today barely existed, and yet life was not only toil. There were moments of laughter, shared meals, storytelling by the fire at night, music from a simple harp. Archaeologists have found gaming pieces in Anglo-Saxon settlements, suggesting that even in hard times people made space for play. It is easy to assume that medieval life was nothing but misery, but that would be too simple. It was demanding, yes, physically relentless, but it was also deeply communal. As the sun sets and the tools are put away, the house fills again with smoke and quiet conversation. The body aches, the hands are rough, but the work of the day has kept hunger at bay, at least for now. And as we sit by that fire, listening to the crackle and the low murmur of voices, we begin to see that survival in this world depends on more than strength. It depends on something even more powerful, family. As the fire burns lower and the work of the day is finally done, something even more important than food or shelter begins to reveal itself. In a Saxon house, survival was never just about strength. It was about belonging. Anglo-Saxon society in the year 950 was built around kinship. Your family was your shield, your reputation, your insurance policy. If someone harmed you, it was not only your problem, it was your family's problem. There was even a legal concept called vergild, which literally means man price. Every person had a value set in silver according to their social rank. If a man was killed, the offender's family had to pay compensation to the victim's kin. It may sound cold to put a price on a life, but in a world without prisons as we know them, this system was designed to prevent endless blood feuds. Payment restored balance. It acknowledged that a life had worth. Think about that for a moment. Your existence had a recognised value in law, not symbolic, measured. Law codes from earlier kings like Alfred the Great, whose reforms still influenced England in the 10th century, show a surprisingly structured legal culture. There were rules about inheritance property, even about how disputes should be settled. This was not chaos. It was order shaped by custom and memory. Inside, the home roles were clearly defined but deeply interdependent. Women were central to household survival. They managed food stores, brewed ale, oversaw textile production. Spinning and weaving were not hobbies. They were economic engines. Some historical records and wills from later Anglo-Saxon England show women owning land and managing estates, especially widows. And children, they grew up fast. There was no long season of carefree adolescence. If you were born in this house by the age of 7, you were already learning adult skills. Boys might train with tools or weapons. Girls learned the intricate craft of cloth making, which required patience and precision. Education was practical, survival-focused. Let me ask you gently. In your world, how much of your identity comes from your family? In 950, your family name, your kin group, could determine whether you were protected or vulnerable. Honour mattered, loyalty mattered, breaking an oath could destroy your standing, and yet within that structure there was warmth. Shared stories passed down through generations, names chosen to honour ancestors, a sense that you were part of something larger than yourself. In this smoky wooden house surrounded by rough walls and flickering light, people were building invisible walls too. Walls of trust, obligation, shared fate. Because beyond labour and law, there was another force shaping how they understood the world. Not just who they belonged to, but what they believed. And yet beneath the marble statues and roaring arenas, something far less glamorous was quietly unravelling the empire from within. Let us talk about money. Not the glittering coins stamped with emperors' faces, but what those coins were actually worth. In the 1st century, the Roman denarius was nearly pure silver. By the middle of the 3rd century, during what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, that same coin contained less than 5% silver. The rest was cheap metal disguised with a thin silver wash. According to economic historians who have analysed surviving coins, inflation soared as trust in currency collapsed. Prices rose dramatically. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Emperors printed more debased coins to satisfy them, which only made the problem worse. Does that sound strangely familiar? When money loses value, confidence disappears, trade slows, farmers hesitate to sell grain, merchants raise prices. The Roman historian Cassius Dio wrote that people began hoarding older, purer coins and refusing the new ones. It was an ancient version of a bank run without banks. At the same time, the empire was hit by devastating pandemics. The plague of Cyprian around 249 to 262 reportedly killed thousands per day in Rome alone. The Bishop Cyprian described streets filled with the sick and abandoned. Modern scholars estimate that some regions may have lost up to 10% of their population. Fewer workers meant less food production, fewer taxpayers and fewer soldiers to guard the borders. And here is the painful irony: Rome did not collapse in one dramatic explosion. It weakened quietly year after year, coin by coin, life by life. Have you ever noticed how great systems rarely fall all at once? They erode, they fray, they stretch beyond what they can sustain. By the late 4th century, even the Roman army looked different. Increasingly, it relied on foreign mercenaries, many of them Germanic tribes settled within imperial borders. Loyalty became negotiable, defence became outsourced. So the question becomes unavoidable when the walls are still standing but the foundation is cracking. How long can appearances protect reality? And that brings us to the final turning point, the moment when pressure from outside met weakness within, and history shifted forever. And then almost quietly the unthinkable happened. In the year 410, the city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths under King Alaric. For 800 years, no foreign enemy had breached the city. 8 centuries. When news spread across the Mediterranean world, people were stunned. St. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, said the city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. Imagine the psychological shock. Rome was not just a city. It was the symbol of order itself. But here is what makes this moment even more fascinating. The sack of 410 was not the end. The Western Roman Empire staggered on for 66 more years. Let that sink in. It was only in 476 that a Germanic leader named Odoacer deposed the young emperor Romulus Augustulus. Interestingly, Odoacer did not declare himself emperor. He simply sent the imperial insignia back to Constantinople and ruled Italy as a king. There was no massive cinematic battle, no dramatic last stand in flames, just a letter, a political decision and silence. Sometimes history ends not with a roar but with paperwork. And yet while the Western Empire fell, the Eastern Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire today, survived for nearly 1,000 more years. Constantinople remained a powerhouse of trade law and culture until 1453. The Roman legal system, especially the Corpus Juris Civilis compiled under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, would later shape European law for centuries. Even today, elements of Roman law influence modern legal systems. So here is the twist. Rome did not simply disappear, it transformed. Have you ever considered that collapse might actually be reinvention in disguise? That sometimes what looks like an ending is just power changing form? As the Western Empire dissolved, new kingdoms rose from its ashes. The Franks, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths. Europe was being rewritten, not destroyed, but reconfigured. And that leaves us with one final question, perhaps the most important of all. If Rome did not truly die, what does its story mean for us today? So what does Rome really leave behind for us? Not just ruins, not just tourist photos of the Colosseum glowing under sunset light. Rome leaves a blueprint, a warning, and strangely, a mirror. Consider this. At its height in the 2nd century under Emperor Trajan, the Roman Empire covered nearly 5 million square kilometres and ruled over an estimated 60 to 70 million people. That was roughly 1/4 of the world's population at the time, according to demographic estimates by ancient historians and modern scholars such as Walter Scheidel. Roads stretched over 400,000 kilometres, with about 80,000 kilometres paved in stone. Aqueducts delivered millions of gallons of fresh water daily into major cities. Concrete domes like the Pantheon still stand 2,000 years later. Rome mastered engineering, law, administration, branding before branding even existed. But here is the uncomfortable truth. None of that made it untouchable. The Roman historian Livy once wrote that moral decline followed prosperity. Edward Gibbon in the 18th century famously argued that the empire's fall was the result of a gradual loss of civic virtue. Modern historians debate his conclusions, but the question remains powerful. What happens when citizens begin to see their state not as a shared responsibility, but as a service provider? Rome's strength was never just its legions, it was its system. Its ability to integrate conquered peoples, to extend citizenship, to adapt. In 212, Emperor Caracalla granted Roman citizenship to nearly all free men in the empire. That was radical, inclusive, strategic. Yet over time, participation turned into dependence. Political offices became dangerous. Tax burdens grew heavier. Local elites avoided public service. When fewer people are willing to carry the system, even the strongest structure begins to wobble. Does that feel distant from us or strangely close? Here is the deeper lesson. Rome did not fall because of one battle, one bad emperor, or one invasion. It fell because complexity outpaced resilience, because expansion became overextension, because short-term survival decisions slowly eroded long-term stability. And yet Rome also teaches hope. Its ideas survived. Republican governance influenced the founding fathers of the United States. Roman law shaped European civil codes. Latin evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. The calendar, we use the concept of a Senate. Even the word civilization traces roots back to Rome. Empires fall, ideas migrate. Maybe that is the real legacy. So when we look at Rome, we're not just studying ancient history. We're studying human nature, ambition, innovation, pride, adaptation, the eternal tension between growth and sustainability. And perhaps the most important question is not why did Rome fall, but what are we building right now? And how strong are its foundations? If this story made you see Rome differently, if it made you reflect even for a moment on our own world, then it has done its job. Thank you for staying on this journey through marble halls, battlefields, plagues, politics, and quiet turning points. History is not dead. It whispers, it warns, it teaches. And in our next story, we will uncover another empire, another rise, another fall, and perhaps another reflection of ourselves.